You're listening to A Slice of Therapy with me, Alun Parry. When we have problems, the most common traditional way that we're taught to deal with problems, to solve problems, is to focus on the problem. And so, for instance, when my washing machine broke, it made sense for me to open up the washing machine and find out what was going on. When the handle came off of my door and it wasn't working properly, it made sense to focus on the problem, find out what was going wrong and fix it. And so we're often taught that the only way to solve a problem is to focus on the problem. In this episode, I'm going to be counterintuitive, and I'm going to explain to you that there's actually another way of solving problems, which is very different, because what it involves is ignoring the problem. Really ignoring the problem completely. And instead of finding the solution in the problem itself, the solution is somewhere else entirely. Now, this seems a very strange concept, doesn't it? How on earth, you might be asking, is it even sensible that when we've got a problem, we try and overcome the problem by completely ignoring it? Does this mean, for instance, that what I'm about to recommend is that ostrich approach of putting your head in the sand and just pretending that the issue isn't there? No, in fact, it means that you address the issue by ignoring the problem. So let me give you an example of what I mean. Let's say one day you are emptying the bins. So you take your bins out of the front where your bigger bins are that get collected by the bin men. And as you're putting the bag into the big bin, you hear a noise behind you, and it's the front door slamming. There's a gust of wind, and now you're locked out, which mightn't be the worst thing in the world, but you've got a newborn baby in the house. So what on earth are you going to do? You can't stay out here, and they, of course, can't let you in, but you need to go back in there in order to care for them, but you're stuck. Now, of course, one obvious answer would be, just put the key in the door and open it. That would be a way of doing it by focusing on the problem. The door is locked, I'll unlock the door. But you don't have your key with you. And you don't have any means of unlocking the door. Now, the traditional way of looking at this would be really to focus on the door itself, to focus on the bit where the key is. It might even involve, trying to find somebody who is going to get you a locksmith in order to unlock the door so you can get back in. And yet by focusing on the door, what you completely missed is that the front window is wide open. Simply because you focused on the problem, you've totally missed the fact that there was another solution that was waiting for you somewhere else. And so there the window is wide open and you don't even notice, because you think that the only way to solve the problem is to focus on where the problem is. And it turned out that the solution had nothing to do with the locked door, because the window was open and you could have just climbed in within a matter of seconds and been able to care for the baby. So in terms of looking to solve a situation by ignoring the problem, that's a good example. And in fact, in order to kind of ignore the problem like this, what we're really looking towards then is to find out what it is that we actually want. Now, in that scenario, we didn't really care whether the door was open or shut. What we cared about is whether we were in the house with the baby or whether we weren't. And so once we identify what it is that we want, we can start looking for ways to actually get there. If we only focus on the problem, then we miss that question of, well, what is it we actually want? Because there might be a better way to get to that destination. And so when I'm with a client, I will often ask a question that is based on more of a metaphor of going on a journey than solving a problem. When we're going on a journey, the first question that we would ask is, well, where do we want to go? How do we know that we've got to this place? And it's a good question, isn't it? Because, anytime you're at a train station, that's the question you ask of each train at each platform. Where do I want to go, and does this train take me there? And so that's a really good first question. Because once we view this as a kind of a journey, by asking what it is that we want and how we will know that we've arrived there, it actually gives us a destination to aim at. So in the example about the locked door, then it would be, well, if this problem were no longer bothering you, how would you know it wasn't? Where would you be? What is it that you want at the end of this? And then we would have said, well, I want to be indoors with the baby. And once you establish that destination, we then see that there's lots of different paths to get there. And so even if the door really is fixed shut, and even if every locksmith in the city is otherwise engaged, we can still get to our destination. We don't have to deal with the problem and focus on the problem in order to build a solution. The solution and the problem might have nothing at all to do with them whatsoever. And so in a therapy kind of situation, to identify what it is that we want is really important because it opens that creativity up. And so I might ask a question in terms of life to really paint out a picture of what it is that we want in some real detail. Because what I'm doing there is I'm helping the person not focus on the problem, which can really drain us of energy, but to build a solution, to build a destination. So supposing that therapy works, how will you know that it's worked? How will you know that this journey that we go on has been useful to you? And then the person can actually start painting out what they want. And one favourite way of doing that is simply to suppose that the thing we want has already happened. So if a miracle were to happen and you were to wake up tomorrow, for instance, and it had just happened and nobody's left a note on your pillow to say it's happened, you just have to figure it out. Like, what would be the things that you would notice tomorrow in your everyday life that told you that the problem was solved? And again, this approach pays no attention to the problem. It focuses on building what it is that you want. And so we might discover, what's the very first thing you would notice even as you're lying there in bed? And it might be that the feeling in the person's stomach has changed. It's gone from butterflies and now it just feels calm. It might be that they notice that they would get out of bed quicker. It might be their partner notices they're smiling and they're chatty. And so it goes on building this lovely, very, very detailed, rich picture of what it looks like. Now, the thing about building a solution rather than focusing on the problem, When you focus on the problem, it's either fixed or it's not. But when you're on a journey, unless you're on Star Trek and you're using those teleporters, it's not a case of here or there. You go on a journey. So if I was walking to my local park, then my park would be the destination. But at a certain point, say 20 minutes in, I would be neither at the park nor here, but I would be on my way. And this is the other lovely way that makes it an important way to kind of build solutions, is that once we actually create a destination, we can then have this sense of being in motion. And often what we'll find is, if we think of the destination that we're heading to as one point, and we think of as far away as we can imagine from the destination as another point, then what will often be the case is that we'll discover that we're actually already on our way. We're actually already on our way to solving these problems that have led us to reach out for help in the first place. We realise that once we've actually painted the destination, some of those things are already present in life. And so this approach where you build a solution, build a destination, it allows us to move forward one step at a time and realise that actually the change that we want is already showing up. And the great thing about that is that once we realise that the change that we want is already showing up in some areas, even to an extent, then we can start to figure out how we did that. How did we get to this point where we're kind of halfway along the journey? And those answers will be very, very unique to each person, but they work, and we know that they work because they're already halfway along the journey, or maybe a third of the way, or maybe even just one step along the way. And yet, if we simply focused on the problem, then it's either still broken or it's fixed. And this kind of sense of movement is much more difficult to capture. And so when we ignore the problem, what we do instead is we create a journey to go on, and we set a destination. And then, much like that train journey, we go stop by stop by stop, noticing that we're getting closer and closer until we end up where we want to be. So to recap then, I started off by saying that you don't need to focus on the problem in order to get a solution to the problem. And in fact, it's often a better way to ignore the problem completely, which sounds strange. But there was the example of the door that shuts behind you when you're emptying the bins. And if you just focus on the locked door, you can't actually get to what you really want, which is to be back in the house with the baby. And that focus, that very singular focus on the problem itself, means that you miss the fact that the window is open. And then thirdly, we saw that instead, that metaphor of going on a journey can be more useful. And so instead of focusing on the problem, we instead build a destination. We ask ourselves, what would it look like if there was a miracle overnight and we just woke up tomorrow with those problems not there? And by describing what we notice, we really paint a very detailed picture of the destination, of the place that we want to end up at. And we saw as well that because it's a journey, just like the train journeys that we go on, it gives us a sense of being on our way. Rather than a problem which is either fixed or broken, on a journey, we start where we start from, which might actually be already on our way, but then we move forward and we can actually spot our own progress, spot our own milestones along that journey, getting closer and closer to the destination. So if that was useful to you, please share the episode so somebody else could get the benefits as well. You can work with me directly. I'm Alun Parry, and you can find out more at liverpoolpsychotherapy.co.uk. And please subscribe to the podcast because it's completely free and it means you'll never miss an episode again. So thanks for listening. I'll be back again tomorrow with another one.